And thank you. And our presenter for August will be John Basili.
Oh, terrific.
So a lot of us are already real familiar with his work, and I'm absolutely looking forward to it. So it should be, yeah, we're moving along. We're moving along. That's all Eileen can hope for. I have to go push this other button.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, Adele's here.
Let's see. No. Oh. All right.
So Tracy, I made you co-host so you can get everything ready whenever
Okay.
you.
I will start to share my screen and make sure it works.
And to everyone who's attending tonight's meeting, thank you, thank you, thank you. You're in for an incredible treat. And it's all going to be good.
It's gonna be good.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yes, Tracy, it's wonderful. Thank you. You know, the president of this group is up there in years. So you gotta take it with a little bit of grain of salt.
Okay, it's 7 o'clock. I'm gonna put myself on mute.
You can see my title slide okay? Everything's working all right?
Yes.
Okay. Shall I get started, or do we want to give people a minute? So I'll get started then. Well, thanks for inviting me here to talk to you all today. I'm very excited. I love talking about photography and the travels that I've done. So I'm going to be talking today about photographing nature on 7 continents. So I've had a wonderful opportunity to be able to see each of the continents, not all the countries in them yet, but I'm working on it. And been taking pictures for a while. So I'm excited to share some of those with you tonight. So a little bit about myself. So I'm a nature photographer, which means I shoot anything outside. I'm based out of New Hampshire. I'm originally from New Jersey. I used to work in Philly, so I'm very familiar with the Philadelphia area. It's one of my favorite cities, actually. And I've always taken pictures since I was a kid, but I really started seriously thinking about it as art during an undergraduate class in photography. So when I started with photography, I was doing black and white film, and quite a bit different. I don't think I really did much nature photography. I did more people and still life kind of images. But I've always been a lover of wildlife, and I pursued a bachelor's and a master's degree in marine biology. So now I try and combine those 2 passions for photography and biology in my art and in my work. So I was bitten by the travel bug pretty early on, and I've had wonderful opportunities to explore the world, which I continue to do. Try and get traveling somewhere either, in the US or internationally every year. And just this last year, despite the pandemic, I was able to make my 7th continent, and that was Africa. It wasn't necessarily a goal I had to, check off all the 7 continents, but it just kind of happened that way. I wanted to see a variety of different places. And again, with the love of wildlife, the country of Kenya is wonderful for that. So that kind of became my last trip. So tonight, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey in pictures to show you all the contrasts and similarities in nature around the world. So we'll start with Oceania, and I have visited the country of New Zealand. So I spent some time at McMurdo Station in Antarctica for my graduate work, and then I worked on station as well So in order to get to McMurdo, you had to fly through New Zealand. So as a bonus, every time you got off what we called the ice, you had a free trip to New Zealand. And you were also much closer to Asia and other places as well for traveling than you would be from the US. So it really opened up a really nice opportunity to explore. So New Zealand's made of 2 different islands, and I spent most of my time on the South Island. And if you haven't been, New Zealand has some very dramatic mountain and ocean landscapes. This picture here is in the Young Valley on the South Island, and this is a mountain appropriately called Mount Awful. It's often used as a mountain climbing route. And this picture, I think, kind of shows a little bit of the weather that probably gave Mount Awful its name. So these are kias, which are a forest or alpine mountain parrot that are native to New Zealand. So they're endemic to that country. They're not very shy birds, and they're very intelligent. They are a parrot species, so similar to parrots you may have seen in zoos, or if you have pet parrots. They're really smart, so they can be really troublesome when you're camping. Unfortunately, they are endangered, and that's largely due to human activity. And also, as we were talking earlier, with climate change, due to them being located in these higher alpine zones, they're probably further at risk, but they are starting to recover. So this is the Wilkin Valley, also on the South Island. This is a glacier carved valley, and you can tell by that kind of U shape of the valley. So some other examples that you may have seen yourself or seen pictures of are Glacier and Yosemite National Parks also have these kind of large U-shaped glacier carved valleys. And at any time, if you have questions or anything like that, feel free to interrupt me. I'm totally fine, if you have a question, or you can ask me at the end. So this is a landscape near Lake Matheson, which is also on the South Island. So these fenced areas are often sheep grazing areas. So not quite nature, but still kind of a beautiful New Zealand scenery that you can see. So as I mentioned, I worked in Antarctica for a few years, and I had some amazing opportunities as a researcher, and then also as working there as science support staff. So the base in Antarctica, its whole purpose is to support science and scientific endeavors down in Antarctica. And I had the opportunity to see some really unique landscapes and wildlife because of my jobs and the work that I did down there. Unfortunately, while I was a marine biologist and I did collect creatures under the sea ice and did some scuba diving, I don't have any underwater photography gear. So I don't have any underwater photos, but the underwater world is really colorful, but above the sea ice, there's plenty of interesting things to see. So to give you just a little bit of brief context when we go through the pictures. So this is the larger continent of Antarctica. And in this little box is McMurdo Station is on Ross Island. So it's actually an island that's adjacent to the main continent. So this is one of the many species of penguins that are in Antarctica. On the side of Antarctica where I was, there were mostly emperor penguins and Adelie penguins. Emperor penguins are the largest of the penguin species in the world, and they're about 3 feet tall. And they're also very stoic and very serious creatures. And then you have the Adelie penguin, which is a lot smaller, maybe about 18, 20 inches tall, but they have much more personality, as you can kind of see in this image, and they're a lot more comical and goofy. And the picture in the intro slide of myself is me holding an Adelie penguin that had gotten too close to base. So we had to remove it. I had a special permit to help remove animals to keep them safe. So they didn't get too close to where we were at station. And we had to pick up the little penguin and we put him in a vehicle and we drove him out far on the sea ice so he could get away. That was quite an adventure. Not many people can say they've hugged a penguin, but I can. This is one of the other common species that we would see diving a lot under the water, and then that would use our scuba diving holes. for breathing holes. So this is the Weddell seal, and this is a pup. So these seals have the southernmost range of any seal species, and they spend a lot of time on the sea ice where there are no predators. Once they go into the water, if they're closer to the sea ice edge, things like killer whales and things like that are predators of these seals. So they dive into ice holes and use cracks to access the rich feeding grounds under the ice. So this is a corner of the island, and this is Arrival Heights, it's called. So it was discovered and named by the British National Antarctic Expedition from 1901 to 1904 under Robert Falcon Scott. And this is Mount Erebus in the background. Mount Erebus is the southernmost active volcano. It's about 12,500 feet tall. And from this vantage point, where I'm standing and what you can see in front of Arrival Heights, the brown landscape, is sea ice. So that's at sea level. So you can see all 12,000 plus feet of Mount Erebus. So while, it's a little hard to get scale in this picture, it is really a huge, massive mountain on the landscape. And if you can see here, this little orange blip, this is one of our dive huts. So that's just like a small, maybe 12 by 12 foot building. So kind of gives you a sense of scale. And, for comparison, what I think is so interesting about Mount Erebus, it being 12,005 feet tall, you can see all elevation from sea level all the way. The images that you often see of Mount Everest only show about 11,500 feet of elevation, as where most photographers are standing at base camp, or some of those vantage points are not at sea level. So while Mount Everest is over 28,000 feet tall, you're only seeing, a small part of that elevation, whereas Mount Erebus, you can basically see the whole mountain. So it's pretty neat. So this is the Cape Evans hut, and this was built by Captain Robert Falcon Scott's British Antarctic or Terra Nova expedition from 1910 to 1913. And this was used on his second and final famed attempt for the geographic South Pole. So this is where the party waited for him to return when he made his failed attempt. Well, I guess he made it to the South Pole, but he didn't make it back. So this is another vantage with Mount Erebus in the background. And while this isn't necessarily nature photo, it does give you a sense of the brutal nature of the weather that these parties that took to the South Pole had to deal with. And this is a relatively nice and sunny day. So this, as I explained, McMurdo Station is on Ross Island. So this is looking across the sea ice, McMurdo Sound, to the mainland of the continent of Antarctica. And Mount Discovery, which is a dormant volcano, is on the left-hand side. And this is at sunset, which you do get some parts of the year. Otherwise, you get 24 hours of sun or 24 hours of dark. And there's a couple of months on either end where you actually get some sunrises and sunsets, which are very beautiful. Now we'll journey to South America and to the Galapagos. So as a biologist, the Galapagos are a lifeless travel destination. It's Darwin's playground. The wildlife he saw in his only a 5-week-long trip inspired his ideas on the theory of evolution. So each island we visited had its own unique habitats and different species or mix of species. And these are some Caribbean flamingos on the island of Punta Cormorant. So these are a couple of male great frigate birds on a nest in Los Lobos. They expand these large sacs on their breasts to intimidate other males and to attract females. And it doesn't seem like this male is intimidating the male next to him very much. This is a female great frigate bird with a chick. So there are those two species of frigate bird in the Galapagos, the great and the magnificent. And they look fairly similar, but there are some subtle differences in plumage color. One shines purple and one shines green. These are Sally Lightfoot crabs on lava rocks, and they're found on most of the islands on coastal areas, and they literally live right in the waves, right at the tide line when the waves come and crash over them. So that's where these guys are found. This is just looking off the side of our boat at a black tip reef shark, which was just swimming around, hanging around, checking out our boat. So these are the famed blue-footed boobies, and this is a picture of them doing their breeding dance. So they show off their beautiful little feet. They prance around, show off their feet. The brighter in color they are, the healthier they seem, and it's easier to get a mate, and mates are more interested. And then oftentimes the female will also return the favor and show off her feet as well. This was one of my favorite species that we saw. This is the waved albatross. And these two adults are showing some breeding behaviors. They'll clack their bills, they'll bow to each other, they coo. And these were found on Punta Suarez. So these birds spend most of their life soaring above the ocean. They have about an 8-foot wingspan, which helps them to do that. They really only come to land to breed, and they live on islands that have tall cliffs because the only way they can really get airborne is to launch off the side of the cliff and just start to glide. So unlike, you know, a duck or other kind of birds you see running, you know, water birds running to get a launching point and start flying, these guys can't really do that. And they land really comically. They don't really have much grace when they land. They just kind of tumble and hit the ground and, you know, make their way. And then they look all, you know, big and graceful when they stand up like, oh, nobody saw that, we're fine. So they're quite funny. So this is a Nazca, or a masked booby. And there's also a third booby species, the red-footed booby, but we only have an hour, so I had to limit myself. So I'll just show you the blue-footed and the Nazca boobies. This is on the island of Punta Suarez. And you can see the ocean in the background. All of these species feed out in the ocean. They eat fish and crustaceans and things like that in the water. So now we'll go to Europe. I'm gonna take a drink real quick. I put Israel in Europe because it's kind of one of those countries that falls somewhere between Asia and Europe, but it feels a little more European to me. So I stuck it in the European continent. We'll also talk about Slovenia and Iceland. So I've just kind of circled them on the map here for reference. So here's Israel here, and we've got Slovenia, this little country here next to Austria and Italy, and then Iceland up here in the ocean. So this is in Israel, and this is a place called Ein Ovdat. And Israel is a very small country, but it has a tremendous variety of landscapes. It does have a lot of desert, and the deserts are very different across the country, even though it's quite small. And they have these little oases. This is a Palestine sunbird. And Israel gets some really unique bird species in the spring and fall because they're in the migratory pathway for many birds to and from Africa. So this bird feeds on insects and nectar, which you can see with its curved bill, it has that purpose. This is a Nubian ibex in the desert. So this is another example of a species that was hunted almost to extinction, but it now has protections and has come back, and it's doing quite well in Israel, almost too well. It can be found in parks and in towns and more urban environments now. So we'll go to Slovenia next. So Slovenia, we're going from deserts to snow-capped mountains. And interestingly, I didn't know this until I went to Israel, but there are ski mountains in Israel, not something you think of. May not be, you know, your best skiing like in Utah, but you can go skiing if you're in Israel in the winter. So Slovenia has the Julian Alps, which are the lesser known end of the Austrian Alps. So these are some layers and layers of the mountains at sunset. They're really gorgeous. They have a lot of great hiking routes and huts that you can stay in. Makes it much easier for these sunrise and sunset shots when you can just walk out your door from your hut. So this is some sunset light, fresh snow falling at the higher elevations, and we're high enough that we're pretty much standing in the clouds. Now we'll go over to Iceland. So it's a little bit more similar to Slovenia than Israel, but it is truly the land of fire and ice. And this is Rock Ptarmigan. This is called Diamond Beach. The iceberg chunks actually wash up on the beach. So down the coast from this area, off to the left, is the Glacier Lagoon. Icebergs come off of a glacier there, float through the Glacier Lagoon, and then they come out to the coast, and just the direction of the currents and all these little icebergs come and beach themselves on the beach. This is an Atlantic puffin. So these are found in a number of locations, as we'll see in this presentation. And they're found in a few different locations along the coast of Iceland. So similar to the giant albatross, these small birds that are maybe 10 or 12 inches tall spend most of their life at sea, which I find really fascinating because they live in cold waters. And they'll overwinter off coastal areas in the Atlantic Ocean, and they only come to land to breed as well. So I picture this small little bird, smaller than a mallard, that's just floating in the ocean in the middle of winter, getting, all the winter storms and everything, and they just survive just fine, and it's pretty impressive.
What is it doing?
It's holding a feather. So they build, I'll show you actually the next picture. They build these little burrows in the tussocks of grass, and sometimes they'll line them with feathers or grasses and things like that. So that bird just had a feather he was collecting. So they do form pair bonds. And like I said, they nest in these little holes or burrows in the grassland. You can kind of see here the entrance to a burrow. And this makes it a lot harder for predators to get to the young chicks and the eggs in the nest. And they nest in colonies. So there's a lot of these little burrows right next to each other. So hundreds of birds, it often means a little bit of privacy is lost because you've got neighbors close by. So similar to, the boobies we saw in the albatross, where they have these similar behaviors. They do bill clacking and other things to kind of strengthen those pair bonds. So the puffins do that as well. So this is just a beautiful rocky coastal tide pool. It reminds me a bit of Maine and Newfoundland in Canada. And if you look on a map, they're really not all that far apart. Next, we'll journey over to Asia, and I've been to Vietnam and India. And just to give you a little reference, when we get to India, the parts of India I've been to, it's a huge country and extremely diverse. And I've only been to, this little part here. So up in the Himalayas in the northern part of India. So still have a lot of the country to see. So this is in Vietnam. So this is downtown Hanoi, which I thought was really interesting. It's this lake called Ho Tay Lake. And in some places, nature looks a little bit different, but the lake is surrounded by parks, and then it's surrounded by this huge city. So a lot like Philly, you've got these beautiful green spaces that people are always enjoying, and you have fishermen in this lake in the middle of the city. And I thought that was just really, really interesting. And they do have, Vietnam isn't all just major, developed cities. They do have some beautiful mountainous areas. So this is Sapa in Northwest Vietnam, and this is a mountainous region, and there are some really beautiful small villages in that area.
Tracy, when you were in Vietnam,
Mhm.
did you find any resentment to being American visiting there? Or?
No, the exact opposite. The people were extremely friendly and warm, and it's called the American War there, which is not surprising. But no, I think unfortunately, because of the war and because of some of the things that have happened in Vietnam over the years, the population of Vietnam is very young. So a lot of them, a lot of the people at the time I was there in 2004, 2005 maybe. So a lot of the people, hadn't lived through the war. So it was kind of post-war. There were some older people, but everybody was extremely friendly. And yeah, I didn't have any, resentment or, foul looks, because I clearly was not from the area. So people knew I was, American or something else. But yeah, no, it's a lovely country. Really beautiful place. I traveled there alone for a month and never once felt unsafe or, had any issues with anybody. Everybody was really friendly. So yes, would love to go back. So this is Halong Bay, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And these are limestone islands up in the north of Vietnam. And this is one of the really colorful fishing boats that traverse this area, as well as all the tourist boats. So now we're going to go over to Uttarakhand, India. So as I mentioned, this is in the northern part of India in the Himalayan mountains, and this is south of Tibet. Culturally, it's very much more Tibetan than Indian. In feel and the culture of the people and everything. A lot of the people are actually Tibetans who had fled Tibet when the Chinese took over. So it does have a very different feel. So this is on the left side, this mountain here. This is Nanda Devi. And some say it's the most beautiful mountain in the world, and I don't disagree. It's about 26,000 feet high, and we were at about 12,600 feet from an alpine meadow camp. And as mentioned earlier, so in that picture of Mount Erebus, where you could see, all however many 12,500 feet of mountain, we're seeing almost 14,000 feet of elevation here, and it's really hard to get scale. Even if I had a person in the image, it's really difficult to tell how big these mountains are. And the mountain from where we're standing is probably 5 or 6 miles away. So quite dramatic landscapes. So this is coming down from the Brij Ganja Pass, which is about 16,000 feet, into another valley. So we're coming up one valley over the pass, and we dropped into this beautiful valley called the Ralam Valley. And people there for scale, and you can see, the snow-capped peaks and the above tree line and the river valley in the bottom. This is a very traditional kind of Indian Himalayan landscape for this part of the country. This was just in one of our camps. So this is a red fox, and it's the same species that we find here in the US. So this species is extremely widespread across the world. I think it occurs on all continents except for Antarctica. So it's extremely widespread and common species. This is a black-winged stilt. And this is in a small lake that we had camped near. So what was really interesting, we approached this camp in this lake, and there were, stilts and some other kind of water birds, feeding. And we're there setting up camp, and about an hour later we look and the lake is dry. I'm like, where did it go? What happened? And it turns out that it was a source of water for a village that was down the hill. And they had a small dam that they operated from below from the village that they opened up when they needed to fill up the reservoirs of water down down below for the village. So it was really interesting that there was a lake and then all of a sudden it was gone. And then by the next morning they closed the dam and it filled back up. So this is another region of India just to the west of where we just were. So this is the Ladakh region of India. So it's a lot drier of a landscape, as you can see here. And so it has some quite different mountain landscapes in the region. This is a monastery on a cliffside. So what I thought was interesting about this is that, you know, the Buddhist monks have a really special relationship with nature, which is one of balance and respect. So, you know, they really, as best they can, live in harmony with nature around them. And a lot of areas around monasteries and things become kind of refuges for wildlife because they figure out it's a safe place. There's no hunters, you know, people aren't hunting the local wildlife and things right around those monasteries. So they kind of become these little protected nature preserves. So this is a valley and you can see the trail here. So this is the trail we came through and it drops back on the back side of this here. So this is a hiking trail, but in reality, it's trails that were made by people over hundreds of years, the local people that move their livestock, mostly yak and goats, between the summer and winter habitats. So we're really just using the local people's trails that they travel every season back and forth to those different habitats for their livestock. This is a mountain pass. So a lot of them are kind of marked with these prayer flags. So this is one of my favorite photographs from my India trips. It kind of encapsulates everything: the wind, the high mountains, the culture of the place, and the spirit of the place. And this is a Himalayan ibex. So this is a distant relative of the Nubian ibex we saw in Israel. So that's kind of one thing that fascinates me no matter where I go. Places can be very different, but you can always find some similarities. The deserts in Israel, the deserts in India, similar types of hoofed animals, foxes that can be found in, you know, backyards in Pennsylvania and valleys in India, you know, so it's really interesting to just see those similarities and contrasts. So next we'll travel a little closer to home. So we'll go to North America, Canada, Mexico, and the US. So this is Newfoundland. This is Cape St. Mary's on the East Coast. And this is a colony of northern gannets. Also some puffins and other seabirds nest on these cliffs, but the northern gannets are by far the most common. They're also related to those blue-footed and Nazca boobies that we saw in the Galapagos. So again, another similarity, you know, a little bit different species, but related, living on those cliff sides as well. So again, pairs form really strong bonds, just like the albatrosses and the puffins. They rub their beaks and they dance too. I don't know what it is about birds. They like to dance. They like to show off. They, you know, like to show off their colors and their moves and attract mates. So a really interesting behavior about gannets is they dive headfirst at super high speeds, up to 60 miles an hour, and they can go 100 feet deep in one of those dives, right into the ocean to catch fish. And they have special body designs so they don't harm themselves, because obviously you can imagine the impact of hitting the water at those speeds could really do some damage if your body was not designed. And it's amazing to watch. And you know, you wonder how many times they run into each other, because if you're diving 100 feet deep and, you know, there's masses of them, you know, 50, 75 birds all feeding, because there might be a school of fish under the water. So, you know, so you get these large groups of gannets diving, and that's pretty impressive to watch. So this is just one fun one from Mexico. So these are coatis. These are a relative of the raccoon, which you probably guessed. You can tell by their mischievous behavior, similar to our North American raccoons, climbing on somebody's house and into the no trespassing area. They can be quite feisty, often found in garbage cans, just like our raccoons. And here again is an Atlantic puffin. So this is the same species that was in Iceland. And this is in Maine up at Machias Seal Island, which is a really neat little island. It borders the US and Canada. Nobody will really claim it as one or the other. Both the US and the Canada say it's their island, but because it's solely for research on seabirds, they let that go and just work cooperatively together at a research station there. So there's a couple of tours that will allow you to actually go on the island, and they have bird blinds where you can go and sit and observe and photograph the birds and just really watch them bringing fish in for their burrows, for their chicks in the burrows, and see them flying around. So it's really neat. This bird was probably about 6 feet away from the blind. This is a common loon and a chick on Lake Nubinussit right here in New Hampshire. And you can see the adult has its head kind of tilted and it's looking for aerial predators. There were actually about 3 or 4 juvenile bald eagles that were on the lake and in the same part of the lake that day. So this loon was definitely keeping an eye out for those aerial predators. And this was taken from a kayak, which was quite interesting because it was pretty wavy and rocky. And I'm sitting in a kayak with my camera gear, and all of you are photographers. Camera gear and lakes don't go together well. So I was very grateful that I didn't tip over or drop my camera in the water, but I was able to snap off a shot of this loon and their chick. This is a picture of the sandhill crane migration at the Platte River in Nebraska. So these birds are pretty ubiquitous. You can find them in many places across the US, but they tend to kind of channel their migratory pathway over this section of the Platte River in Nebraska in the spring migration and then in the fall again. So they will stop over here midway on their journey up to the Arctic from southern habitats, all the way as far south as Texas and into Central America. And they will stop over here to feed up, and they'll stay there for a couple of weeks, and they're there in the thousands. The sounds of the large number of birds, they roost in the wetlands at night because they're less likely to get surprised by predators. It's hard for a coyote to sneak in through water. So they do roost in these wetlands, and the Platte River has this really unique protected habitat that allows them to do that. And along with these sandhill cranes, who are pretty common, they're not really in danger. They used to be. They were hunted like a lot of things. We didn't realize that hunting species could actually destroy them and get rid of them. So they have recovered quite a bit, but the whooping crane, which is a similar bird to the sandhill crane, there's only about 500 of those left, and they're slowly recovering as well. And they'll often migrate within the packs of the sandhill cranes. This is a greater prairie chicken. This was at sunrise on a lek, which is a breeding area where, again, they dance and they show off for each other, and the males will joust and fight, and while they're looking for the females, who are usually at the edge of this little lek area, kind of a circular area where they'll hang out. And the females just kind of hang off to the side and watch and see, which one's got the best dance or the best fight or things like that. And this was in northwestern Minnesota. This is a snowy owl in coastal New Hampshire. So this is in winter. So occasionally snowy owls will migrate further south than they normally are found. They do breed up in the Arctic, but in the winter time, when populations get higher in the northern latitudes, sometimes they'll come further down south, and they call that an eruption, as some years more birds come south than others. And it's usually, why it's done is a little bit in debate, but it's mostly when there's larger numbers of birds, so they come a little further south, so there's less competition for food in the winter and they can find food. So coastal areas like that in New Hampshire and Massachusetts are great areas because it's similar to their Arctic habitats, where they just have some grasses and some brush and things like that. So it's a great opportunity for them to feed on our little rodents.
We've seen them, I've seen them in Lancaster County,
Yep.
west of Pennsylvania. Yeah, so they get down here as well.
Yeah, they go fairly far south. My first time I saw a snowy owl was in undergrad. I went to Stockton State College in South Jersey, and there was a refuge along the coast there, and a snowy owl showed up. So our bird class went, and we had to go see the snowy owl because it was not as common. But yeah, it seems like they're doing fairly well, and yeah, there's a lot of reports of them further south in the winter. This is a female ruby-throated hummingbird that's in my garden. I actually took this a couple of weeks ago. I've got a few females that have been hanging around. I've planted a large garden with the sole purpose of attracting native wildlife. So different kinds of birds and bees and wasps and butterflies and moths and things like that. So this is one of my little female hummingbirds that comes into my garden. So we'll show a few insects, a little something different. So this is a sweat bee on black-eyed Susan in my garden. So this is one of many beneficial native pollinators that you can find. This is a bluette damselfly, and this is in a wetland in northern New Hampshire. These guys are challenging to photograph because they move around quite a bit, but if you go out early in the morning when it's cool, they're often a lot slower, a little bit more cooperative. This is a tiger swallowtail in my garden on some milkweed. And again, you can tell by the light, it's probably early morning again when it's a little bit cooler, so they're a little bit slower because insects are a challenge to photograph. And this guy, you can see his nectar feeding right here. It's got this little tongue in the proboscis, technical term, in the flower. This is, I think, a common bumblebee. Bumblebee species are a little bit hard to identify. They have some very specific markings to look for, and they're also often moving around quite a bit, or in this case, hiding in morning glory that's in my garden. Over the last few years, I've been experimenting with some night photography and doing some Milky Way photographs. So what's amazing is if you were to go out on a night like as shown in this picture, you would kind of see the Milky Way. Many of you maybe have seen it. It's kind of like a milky, cloudy kind of spot in the sky, but the camera really can pick up these amazing colors and see so many more stars and collect so much more light than our eye can really see. So it's really an exciting thing to photograph because, you know, you see it and you're like, well, yeah, there's the Milky Way, and you take your picture and you get it back, and you can see so much more. So it's kind of really exciting. So this was actually taken in New Hampshire, but when I show this one and don't tell people where it's taken, a lot of people think it's, oh, is that in the savannas of Africa somewhere? You know, it's got this acacia tree, and like, no, that's just a little oak tree sitting in a field in a farm. So again, it's those little similarities or things that make you think, where are I? New Hampshire? No, it's not Africa. It's, that's New England. This is a waterfall in New Hampshire also. Gleason Falls. So again, using those tools that we have as photographers, just, leaving the shutter speed, leaving the shutter open for a lot longer time, slowing down that shutter speed, you just get this really amazing image that you wouldn't see with your naked eye. And honestly, going there, if I had seen this, I wouldn't think, oh, if I do a 30-second shutter speed, I'll get this really great swirl. Another photographer in my camera club here was like, oh yeah, there's this great spot, you can get a swirl. I was like, oh, I've always wanted to get a swirl in a waterfall or in a river. So really interesting, again, the things that your camera can capture that you can't necessarily see with the naked eye. This is the White Mountains in New Hampshire as well. So this, I just used some infrared editing presets in Lightroom, just to kind of give it a little bit different feel, to make the trees stand out and again, get a really nice feel for those layers of mountains at sunset. This is sunrise on the coast of New Hampshire. And one of my favorite national parks is the Badlands, and this is in South Dakota. There's amazing desert landscapes, really colorful stratified rock and flowers and all these really unique plants. And especially after a light rain, the colors really pop on these hillsides. This is in Yellowstone National Park in the winter. Highly recommend a winter visit to Yellowstone if you ever get the opportunity. This is a fox, again, that same species we saw in India. Here it is in Yellowstone National Park. And this is a coyote traversing a marsh in the winter, also in Yellowstone. So coyotes and foxes don't hibernate like bears often do in these areas. So they're always on the move looking for food, even in the middle of winter. They've got a pretty tough life in the winter, but seem to do okay. And lastly, I thought I would end with my last big trip in the last of the 7 continents, so Africa, and I visited the country of Kenya, which is in Eastern Africa. So this is an elephant family in Masai Mara. I really liked elephants prior to going to Kenya. I mean, who doesn't? They're really interesting creatures. You see these specials on National Geographic or Discovery or, but afterwards there was really no denying the family structure of elephants is truly beautiful. It's amazing to witness, it's not like seeing it on TV. It brings a whole other level to, just watching the matriarch of a whole herd and, really being protective of the young ones, and then the middle, the little bit older young adult elephants playing together, but also still kind of watching over the younger ones in the herd. And it's really fascinating just to watch them. So these are some elephants in Samburu National Park. And these were probably a couple of siblings, and they're just really affectionate with each other, always touching each other, stealing food from the other one, just see these really fun behaviors when you're watching them. This is a giraffe in Samburu National Park. And again, similar to some other places we've talked about, we visited 3 different parks in Kenya, only spaced about a couple of 100 miles apart, but they all similarly had very different landscapes. So kind of like the Galapagos, each of these parks, some were drier than others. So, they all had different types of vegetation. Some, one park we went to was situated around a large lake, and it had, the savannas and forested areas around it. And then right outside that was a city, where sometimes the zebras escaped and wandered through town, and they had to wrangle them back and get them back into the park. So really unique place. So this is another giraffe. I did this one in black and white to kind of show the patterns. There's 3 different giraffe species in Kenya: the Maasai, Rothschild, and reticulated. And each has a really unique type of pattern to its coat. And once you learn them, you can tell those species apart fairly easily by those patterns and types of patterns in their coat. It's really interesting. This is an African gray hornbill in Samburu National Park. With the bright sunlight and angle I was shooting from, I used high key to really highlight the unique bill of this species, and you can see why it's named the hornbill. It's got this really unique shaped bill. These are some young male ostriches, which are showing off for each other near a river in Samburu National Park as well. So they were just prancing around and thought they were really funny, showing off. You know, there were a few females in the background, you know, again, trying to impress them with their feathers, and they weren't quite dancing. These weren't dancing, but they do dance. We saw some ostriches dancing as well. These are some young Thompson's gazelles that were play fighting, so practicing for when they get a little bit bigger and they're, you know, defending their harems from other males. So these guys were just having a little bit of fun. These are some zebras, and obviously these are the hides, and you can see the stripes that are used to help blur them from predators. So I don't know if any of you use a mirrorless cameras and have the eye detection or the eye tracking software, or have heard of it. So basically, if you're not familiar with it, the camera is smart enough to know the smallest eye on a little bird in the camera, and it will track that eye and keep that in focus. And it's a game changer if you do wildlife photography, except if you're trying to photograph zebras, which I thought was really funny. So I'm trying to focus on a zebra and I'm trying to get it to track onto the eye, and it can't find the eye. And I'm like, oh, wait, that's because zebras, they're meant to do that. They have the stripes through their eyes so the predators can't find their heads and find that vulnerable part of their neck, and you know, can't tell that part from the other zebras. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to not use eye tracking on zebras because clearly the zebra stripes are smarter than even the camera's AI. So I thought that was pretty funny. So this is the wildebeest migration across the Mara River from Tanzania over to Kenya. Tanzania is on the left side where the wildebeest is leaping from, and they're all coming into Kenya. What you can't see in this image is all of the hippos and crocodiles that are surrounding these crossings. So the hippos just get cranky if the wildebeest, you know, jump into them. They, you know, show their teeth and get all cranky. But the crocodiles are waiting for an opportunity to snatch dinner. So that's why these wildebeest, they're very hesitant to get in the water. And then when they do in a large group, and they go as fast as possible, splashing and making as much racket as they can to try and get away and through before the predators find them. So this is a lioness. She was by herself, which I thought was impressive. She had taken down an oryx, which is bigger than a white-tailed deer, probably bigger than like an elk or something that you find in like the Rockies. And she had taken this down all by herself. And this was just before sunset in Samburu National Park. And lastly, this is a lioness and a month-old cub. They were sleeping without a care in the world. We were about 20 feet from them in our Land Cruiser. I was not on foot. But they really are the kings of the animal kingdom in Kenya. Our guide said that lions just don't care. They know that nothing's going to mess with them. You know, they have to watch their cubs can be vulnerable to hyenas and things like that. But otherwise, animals just don't mess with lions in Kenya. And that's all I have. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions about places I was shooting, landscapes, wildlife, or if you're in New Hampshire and want a shooting buddy, drop me a line. I'm happy to go out and show you some fun places to photograph.
Tracy, you were, by the way, hello. Nice to see your face after talking to you.
You as well, John.
But you've done a lot of winter photography. Do you have to, do you do anything to winterize your cameras or?
Not really. Mostly just bring a lot of extra batteries, and the extra batteries keep in a warm place. The cameras can handle cold temperatures pretty well. It's more just the battery life, dips.
Mhm.
It goes a lot faster in the cold. I'll let you know, I'm going up to Yellowknife this winter to photograph auroras, and the average temperatures are about -40. So I'll let you know. But I think in those extreme cases, I'll probably have heat packs on the camera, and mostly again, just to keep the batteries from dying in, 30 seconds. But in general, yeah, even at, 0 degrees or so, your camera can handle that pretty well. So yeah, good question.
Tracy, hi there. That was a very nice presentation. Thank you. I
Thank
thought
you.
I was watching a PBS special.
Excellent.
I thought some of your the exposure and the sharpness of some of the images were just astounding. I'm wondering if you could just talk for a minute about gear. What kind of gear are you using? What kind of lenses do you match with what kind of, photos? And how do you manage all that gear, out in the wilderness?
Yeah, no, those are really good questions. So I recently, just last summer, upgraded, and I did go Canon mirrorless. I have the R6, and I was shooting before that for probably 7 or 8 years. I'm not one of those people who upgrades their gear very often. I use it till it pretty much limits what I want to do, and that's where I got, and that's when I went with the mirrorless, and I was intrigued by the eye tracking because I do a lot of wildlife photography. So most of the images that you saw here, especially when traveling, because I don't like to carry a lot of gear. I don't like to change lenses. So I'm not somebody who uses a lot of prime lenses, even though those can give you really sharp, nice results. Those lenses are often a little bit higher quality, but I don't want to have to change my lens or carry 4 lenses when I'm backpacking through the Himalayas. So a lot of those, like in India, I had a Canon D70D, which was a crop frame. And Tamron, for crop frame cameras, made a really nice lens, the 18-300. So it covered everything. So I could get those wider landscapes. I could get, zoomed in a little bit more if there was wildlife or, just something a little more interesting. So it really gave me that range. And the quality was really nice as well. For Kenya, when I did upgrade, I had the mirrorless then, and I splurged on the lens I had been admiring for a while, because again, I hadn't bought gear in a while, so I kind of went crazy and I bought the mirrorless, and I got the Canon 1-400. And I love that lens. It's really fantastic. And I use that because you can get so close to wildlife in Kenya. I think I had that on my lens 90% of the time. I brought the 24-240 just for some landscapes, but I mostly just kept the 1-400 on the whole time. And I do have the extender for that as well. So like the hummingbird, and that in my garden, I've used that. And then I have a macro lens. So I kind of have, I guess, 4 lenses that I use, mostly the 24-240 now for traveling. And then I have a wide angle f2.8 for some of the Milky Way stuff. I have a macro lens for bugs. And then I have the 1-400 for wildlife. So yeah, I keep it to a minimum, and yeah, I try and carry as few as possible when I'm traveling.
Well, thank you very much. You mentioned the hummingbird shot. Can you tell us about, did you use any artificial light there, or how did you
No. So that one, I can pull it back up too. Let me see. So the way my garden is, I have woods about maybe 20 feet behind the garden. And I just happened to be so that the woods were far enough back that they just turned black. I had a low, I think it goes down to F8 because I had the multiplier on the 1 to 400. So it blacked out the background. I really didn't even have to darken that very much to get that. Yeah, and I learned the patterns of my hummingbirds, so I could sit in the shade and kind of watch and wait for them to come into the garden. So I knew I would be ready. So
Thank you.
Hey,
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about what kind of science you're doing with when you're in your daily life besides the photography. Like what kind of experiments and stuff as you go to some of these places.
well, so all of these places are basically fun travel trips. I am now what I call an office biologist. So I actually work for an environmental consulting company, and I do environmental permitting and regulations for solar energy projects. So deal with, wildlife and species issues and things like that for renewable energy projects. So photography is my fun job.
Tracy, these are some fantastic photographs.
Thank you.
I'm just curious if I know I know one of your goals is to see as many places as possible, but is there a particular place you're dying to go back to?
Oh, that's a good question. It's hard because I always want to see something different, but I really want to go back to Kenya. I would like to see a few other places there. And maybe I haven't been to Uganda yet, so that's not a return place, but my husband and I are thinking of returning to India again, but a little bit different location again. So somewhere a little bit further east, but again, still northern India. But yeah, I think Kenya and the Galapagos, I feel like the first time was so amazing. I wonder if the second time would be as amazing or less amazing because I had already been there. Because that's a place I could go back to over and over again. Just, again, it's just the wildlife. You can get 5 feet from it. No, they don't care about you. So yeah, good question.
Good answer.
Any recommendations on where I should go next?
Well, I'm not the person to ask. I hardly ever travel, so
Oh.
I'll leave it to some of these other guys.
I'm always looking for ideas.
Well, here's another dumb question. Besides penguins, have you hugged any other animals?
I have hugged, let's see. Besides like domestic animals, do nudibranchs and polychaete worms count? Nudibranchs are sea slugs in the ocean. So yeah, probably nothing all that exciting as a penguin.
Oh yeah, and are you planning to do any underwater photography?
I've thought about it, but I think I have dove, obviously using dry suit gear, which is a lot of gear in Antarctica to stay warm. And I've kind of migrated as I get a little older to less and less gear and stuff. So I think underwater photography is just that much harder than terrestrial wildlife photography. Like I can sit in my garden for 45 minutes, an hour, and just sit there and watch hummingbirds, but I don't have to worry about my air running out or, like floating away or, So I think just the challenge of underwater photography intimidates me a little bit. There's some amazing underwater photography, but the effort to get that level of photography is, I think, beyond me. I have a great deal of respect. And, you know, a lot of underwater photographers, they use lighting systems and things like that too. And I tend to be more of a natural light person. I don't really use much even in my macro photography in terms of, you know, ring lights or anything like that. So yeah. Other questions?
Tracy, it's Eileen.
Hi.
I cannot begin to thank you enough. I know that this was in the works for a while, and let me tell you, it was worth the wait. It was just an amazing presentation, and I just thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I know that everyone who attended tonight's meeting, it is just like amazed and ready to go find their favorite animal to take a couple quick pictures.
Love to see them.
It's just great to be able to see what photography really is about. And you've demonstrated it so well, because photography is capturing something that you can share and bring information to a group of people that would not have gotten that information if it weren't for photography and for your incredible photography. And we thank you. We thank you. We thank you. We thank you. The Photographic Society is going into their 160th year. We will have an exhibit at the Plastic Club in October to celebrate our anniversary. And it's just, everything is just going to be good. And it's so important that we thank photography and we thank photographers, because that's what really helps our minds grow and visualize. And it's just amazing. And like, I'm just saying, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, because you've inspired that writing with light part of our brain. And that's what the Photographic Society, for the last 160 years, since we brought photography to Philadelphia, it's writing with light. It's capturing images so that we can share them with people who otherwise would not see these images. And it's just educating, and it's just amazing. And I hope what you're getting from all my yappity yap is that I am incredibly grateful for your presentation. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to talk to you guys, and
Our
I'm glad
our
to
next
share everything with you.
is August 16th. I will send out the information for that meeting. And as a special treat, it's going to be images that John Basili, I know a lot of our members are familiar with John Basili, and he spent a year or so traveling around the United States, and he has an incredible group of photographs that he just can't wait to share with everyone. So save the date, August 16th. All right, and everyone who came tonight, I hope you guys are all staying nice and warm, nice and cool. And that you're grateful that you were able to do a Zoom meeting tonight, and you didn't have to head out in the heat. So enjoy, stay nice and cool. Good night, and very, very pleasant dreams about all the incredible photography that you just saw.
That was a real treat. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so
Thanks
much
to
for
both of
having
you.
me.
Thanks, Tracy. Really appreciate it.
you.
Nice, very
welcome.
nice program.
Thank you.
Thank you.